Good afternoon. This is Al Rivet, Senior Director of Enterprise Sales with Lowry Solutions. Today we're going to speak about the third webinar in a series of OS migration to Android across the enterprise. And we're going to focus specifically today around the strategy, the deployment, and the support of that mobile environment. I've been in mobility across a number of companies for the last 25 years, focusing on, again, the execution, the solution side, and devices themselves. With me today, I'll introduce Nick D'Agostino.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick D'Agostino, the product manager at Lowry Solutions, and I also have quite a bit of experience in this field as well. We've really been hitting the ground running as far as the OS migration to Android. It's something that can't be put off any further, and we are happy to discuss that with you today.
Thanks, Nick. So as I mentioned, this is the third series in the webinars. Back on August 8th was the first series that we covered really the Windows Mobile end-of-life announcement and of support. And then on September 19th, was just kind of a look ahead of that migration. And what we've learned really is, as Nick mentioned, Windows is going away eventually. There promises to be some significant user interface and productivity gains from the Android platform when looked at and utilized. Was Windows Mobile really secure? Migration plans. Doesn't have to be immediate. Should be looked at sooner than later. All the applications to consider, what's the difference in the update strategy, and the necessity of enterprise mobile management. Nick, do you want to, as Nick was actually involved with the prior two webinars, do you want to elaborate a little bit on what we've covered so far?
Yeah, absolutely. And to anyone who's missed those two webinars, the recordings are available on our website at lowrysolutions.com, and then you go to the resources tab and you can find them there. So if you haven't had a chance to watch them, we highly encourage that you do. A lot of great information in there. So as we'll learn in the coming slides, Windows Mobile and Windows CE is going away, and it is being replaced almost entirely by Android. And the reason for this is because with Windows no longer producing Windows CE, Windows Mobile operating systems, they're no longer supporting them with security updates either, which can cause a lot of problems for businesses down the line. You don't want to get caught with your guard down and then find out that you've been breached because you haven't had a security update for the last few years. Some of them have already sunset. Others are coming right around the corner. We will see those dates, and we'll make sure that we take note of them. But also in the productivity gain. So when you're talking about sunsetting Windows Mobile, Windows CE device, and talking about doing a refresh of devices that are Android, you get a lot of other benefits as well. A big benefit that we see is it's just much more intuitive and it's much easier to use, and especially with today's generation. If you handed a 20-year-old, a device that has the punch keys on it, they really wouldn't know what to do with it. It'd take probably a week to do the training. But if you handed them an Android device or an Android barcode scanner with a touch screen, they would be able to pick it up immediately, just because we use our consumer devices all the time. So it's something that we're really familiar with. And in the newer devices as well, you're also seeing productivity gains with things like an extended battery, because the hardware, it's better, it's newer. You're seeing a lot better productivity. Android's a pretty light operating system, especially compared to Windows. So you're not running as many processes. You do notice that things do move quicker, and there's a lot less hanging, and there's a lot less crashing of applications on Android. Also, the security is a big one, because if Windows no longer has security updates being pushed to it, you're kind of out on your own and you're vulnerable. Android it's the new gorilla in the room, and it is going to be patched and maintained by Google and by Zebra, as we'll see with Zebra Lifeguard, and we'll touch on that as well. But it will be supported in the coming years, as far as you can see. So it's not going anywhere. And then finally, the Android devices that you'll be replacing your Windows devices with, they kept it in mind that people know migration is usually a headache. So they've done all that they can to make it as easy and seamless as possible. There's a lot of apps that come default loaded onto these Android devices that allow you to do things like terminal emulation, so you can just go right into your systems. So that was definitely kept in mind as well. So you'll see that the migration isn't necessarily as painful as it might sound at first. We also touched on EMM, which is big these days. So for those who aren't familiar, EMM is Enterprise Mobility Management. That's what MDM, which is Mobile Device Management, has evolved into. People don't just need to manage devices now, they need to manage their entire enterprise and all the entire ecosystem of those devices. So a couple of really good uses for having EMM on these new devices, the Android devices at your organizations and companies, is features like asset reporting, being able to, if you're IT, being able to remote control into a device if there's any problems, being able to install applications silently over the network. You can do things like configure security settings, Wi-Fi, you can set restrictions on that device. All of these things that are offered up as EMM solutions, it can really, really make it a lot easier to not only deploy the devices, but also to manage the life cycle of them as well. Finally, we really touched on security, and we will again today because it's so important. The mobile malware is currently growing at 6 times the rate of desktops and workstations. And the reason for that is because there's more devices, and that's going to continue to grow. That trend is not going to change anytime soon. So as you see more and more breaches, and you've heard about them, you've heard about the WannaCry attacks and the ransomware and things like that, a lot of that is being targeted toward mobile. So if you're running Windows CE or Windows Mobile, you're especially vulnerable to those security risks.
Excellent, Nick, thank you. So let's have a little look at the mobile environment, and we'll just go back maybe 5 years. So from the Lowry Solutions standpoint, we have a heavy footprint across Fortune 100 manufacturing, supply chain, and if you look at that environment, heavily a Windows CE environment for all devices, be it purpose-built devices across the plant floors and the distribution centers. And Windows CE for a good 10 years was an IT manager's dream in that it never really had any OS updates. So devices could be out there for a very long time. They could be used for their applications and not waiting to be touched. And therefore, there wasn't really a need for enterprise mobile management. They didn't need a lot of management of the devices. They just worked. There were a lot of OEMs out there that were providing products. And you typically had 1 or 2 that were the local experts at that facility. So, you know, any troubleshooting of the device, or if a device went in for a repair, then the device would come back with factory settings. And you'd have that local expert that would actually grab that device. It could be a tool crib or a spot where they held them, and they'd be able to load the emulation client on there and connect to the network and give it back to the user to keep the cycle going. And that was pretty much the case across a lot of the manufacturing and distribution facilities. What we're hearing from our customers is they don't really have the ability, and they don't have the people available, not only just having the people available, but having technical expertise to be that conduit around these mobile devices. So now looking forward, when devices are going to Android, it's a very simple to use operating system, but it's different. Android proves to have monthly, quarterly, biannually updates to the operating system. I'm going to cover that a little bit later, whether do you really have to do all these updates. There's pros and cons. There's times you will really be forced to. There's times you can get away with it for a little while. But there's going to be a lot of updates to those devices. Enterprise mobile management almost becomes an absolute must for these devices. There's fewer OEMs in the environment, specifically around purpose-built devices. There's been a lot of consolidation over the years. But again, that resource shortage. So again, device, if you look from a steady state day 2 support model, device breaks down, goes to OEM or whomever to get repaired, comes back as a factory default. How are we going to go and make sure it is loaded on the network applications for end users who are traditionally not the most tech savvy, nor need to be, right at the plant floor? So things are definitely changing, and how are we going to architect and plan for this appropriately going forward? Nick, would you like to cover, just so again, we've covered this in some previous webinars, but we do want to just cover that again, just again focusing on some of these dates. So Nick, would you like to provide some feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the key sunset dates. We discussed that Windows CE and Windows Mobile, they are going away. In fact, a lot of the devices that are being manufactured will no longer even have an option to put Windows on them. So as you can see from this table, Windows Embedded CE 6.0, which is the first line, that one is already beyond its extended support end of life, which means that if you have a device that's running Windows Embedded CE 6.0, you're not getting security updates. And you haven't gotten a security update since April 10th of 2018. And you can see that that is not a sustainable model. And as we move down the table here, it's not just the Windows CE, but it's also Windows Mobile, it's Windows 7, and then Windows 8.1 and Windows 10 as well. So I would encourage anybody to definitely take a screenshot of this, because these are very key dates, and they can't be ignored, and they are not going to change. These are set, and you really need to make sure that you're conscientious of them, so that you do, when you put together your migration strategy, you are able to make sure that you're compliant and that you do have security updates going forward until you're on your new devices.
Thank you, Nick. So just a couple of questions, frequently asked questions that we're hearing, from some of our customers. This is an event that obviously is unplanned by our customers and users. It's an event that we can't avoid, and really, how do you manage to this, and what's the reality of it? So, a question: do I have to upgrade all my Windows devices to Android? The answer is, well, eventually, but perhaps not right away. There's a lot of different reasons. Upgrading all your devices could be a governance security decision as to when and how quickly. However, most will not upgrade all the Windows devices immediately. Due to the fact that Windows is going away, you'll have to replace all. But it could be a staggered approach. Our recommendation is just be prepared and have a strategy. It may not be now, but eventually these devices are going to be. There's only so many chipsets that will support Windows mobile devices before the dates come upon us that Nick mentioned. And historically, in this specific, there will be companies that will probably consume a fair amount of those in a time frame where we need to be prepared a little bit sooner than later.
To the question, do I really need to accept the Android updates? The answer is technically no, you don't absolutely have to. Should you? Absolutely. And with Zebra devices, they have an operating system that's called LifeGuard, which is co-developed with Google, and they do releases of LifeGuard that you can install, and basically each time you do it, it is just an Android update, but it comes with the additional features that you would expect for enterprise Android devices. So the importance of taking updates is that you have, within that package, you have all of your security patches, you have any firmware upgrades, you have any applications that are native to the device, so that's very important for compatibility, and you also get performance increases because of that. So you don't want to be running on an old OS when you have an option to upgrade to the latest and greatest.
So next, we're going to start discussing really the strategy around implementing a solution and delivering the solution and supporting the solution. Okay, so once you set out your plan to make your migration, for some that are on the call, this will look very, very familiar to you all, and I would highly stress, as we discuss the implementation, this will be the agile approach that Lowry follows explicitly. And I would recommend, you'll see the solutions and the approach and delivery and support. Lowry is a provider of these solutions. This is not an infomercial for Lowry to provide them, but whether you're going to provide these services internally or if you have a service provider, our recommendation is follow this very, very closely so that all is thought of up front, all is looked at from delivery and support. Because the users, the mobile users today, as Nick kind of mentioned in the demographics, the patience around not working devices and not configuring information is it's a much different environment. Their expectation of working out of the box is it's much more urgent. So the first thing is the discovery mode. You really have to look at everything around this environment and the current business conditions. Really, what are you trying to drive with this? What's the proof of concept going to look like? What do I need to really investigate and deliver? Okay, that's got to be the first one, and all stakeholders involved with that. So next, plan the work before you work the plan. You have to have a project with all stakeholders delivered. What devices are you going to go ahead and replace? What applications? Everything around that, and a very documented process to make sure that this can be implemented and delivered across the board. Then the implementation phase. What user acceptance? What stakeholders do we need for this implementation phase? And then support. After the sales support. So as I kind of talked a little bit prior, do you have the resources at the plant facility after device is broken, returns to the facility? What's that entire ecosystem need to look like? So the first thing I would mention, and I'm going to kind of follow that the approach there in how Lowry Solutions would approach this environment, is around this mobile device, around the users, investigate and turn over every rock. Look at the right devices. Look at the right applications. Look at the right settings. Do your proof of concept. Is there anything around that device that needs to be added to it? You really don't want to shortcut this step at all, because again, it's all about the workability of the device in the user's hands and the acceptance of that device. Again, if you've got people internally or if you have providers, this is something you should definitely come to expect from that discover phase. So then when it comes to the implementation phase, boy, again, you need to turn over every stone in what all will be on this, what applications, what settings, the MDM environment, any activation, staging, kitting, multi-vendor, anything around that. Again, make sure you expect these deliverables to deliver these devices out the field, or if you're doing it yourselves internally. Best laid plans, but if the device ends up in the user's hands, not working and not well thought of, that rejection and trying to recover is not easy with the end user. So next is the day 2 support. Again, we've been hearing from our customers that they really want somebody that can manage all those mobile devices in between the end user and some OEM contract. Who's going to retrieve devices from those plants, keep track of all those devices? Who's going to manage the turnaround times for the OEMs? And who is going to reload those devices with configuration settings for end user, turn on when it gets there? This is a lot of last mile touch points that those resources just aren't there as much. And we feel that the Android operating system, with the updates, with EMM needed, with everything around that, is going to require actually a little more hand-holding than the CE devices did in the past. So this is a step that Lowry Solutions is definitely investing heavily into this delivery, just based on customer feedback and asking us to get involved. So we've covered discovering really what the environment needs to look like. We've covered implementing and deploying devices out to the field, and then supporting the devices day in and day out for the use of that device. Something that again, that Lowry Solutions is hearing an awful lot from the customers is, now I want that data. I want the data from inception of device to touch points, turnaround times, again with the OEMs, assets. Where are my assets? Where are these devices? And technical support and replenishment of devices, replenishment of anything really across there. They're looking really for that single source of data. It can be across a couple of OEMs. It can be across multiple. They want to know what's the utilization of the devices out in the field. And that's something that you really should expect from your provider, that we're seeing more and more. It comes down to, there's a lot of good service providers out there, and there's a lot of companies that do a really good job internally of managing their mobile environment. But that data around the utilization to make sure the just the efficiency of the cost of the devices out in the field is very, very important. And that's something, again, that we're seeing more and more. So I'm going to hand it over to Nick to cover a couple of the finer bullet points on security and the timing.
Thanks, Al. So really, you have to ask yourself, what does end of life, end of support mean for your company, for the Windows Mobile, Windows CE? And it means that you need to begin to start constructing a plan of how you're going to make the migration to Android. And it's something that can't really be put off much longer. In 3 years, as we saw the dates earlier, it's gone, so it's no longer supported. Other considerations you need to take into account is some retooling and upgrading to applications and to the operating system that Al had mentioned. Sometimes there is a little bit of configuration involved, and it needs to be thought of prior to jumping in. You don't want to just pull the device out of the box and then expect it to be able to work flawlessly within your system and within your network. There's things that need to be done to optimize that, and there's things that we do as Lowry Solutions does with our staging and some of the other services that Al mentioned, to make sure that when you pull a device out of the box, this thing's good to go. It connects up to the network. It already has all the applications configured. Has any telnet settings or any TE emulation that needs to be set up, configured. So we really shoot for that kind of seamless process, and you would expect that from anybody that you're working with, any partners. Also, upgrading your hardware to fully utilize the Android platform. It's good to have as much knowledge as possible, because knowledge is power in this regard. So understanding what the capabilities are really allows you to increase productivity. You'll get better employee retention, a lot of benefits that are measurable, and even those that aren't. So you'll even see, and we've seen this firsthand, and I'd like to bring an example into this, because I know that nobody wants to be the first person to make the jump, and the jump to Android from Windows can seem like it's quite a leap of faith. But we had one of our customers who was running Windows devices. It was barcode scanners at their plant. They're an automotive manufacturer and they're tier 1. They were entertaining the idea of Android because they heard that this was coming up, that the end of life couldn't be postponed any longer for Windows. So they contacted us, and we were happy to go ahead and get them a demo and do a consultation with them and walk them through it. And after going through the motions and them getting familiar with these new Android operating systems, the user adoption rate was stellar. Especially with anybody who's younger, they immediately pick up on it because this looks just like their phone, and it works the same way. And these were barcode scanners, and they connected to their AS400 system, an IBM ERP, and with the TE application that comes loaded on the Zebra devices, we were able to get that thing configured in no time and hooked up to their system. So it does seem a bit scary, and you do have to plan for it, but along the way you will see that it's not always as difficult as it seems, and sometimes, as people, we tend to anticipate the worst and hope for the best. And then also the importance of the proper configuration. So when we're working with that particular automotive supplier, we're their trusted advisor, so we can walk them through exactly what all their configuration needs are, and that way they avoid any risks or exposure to downtime if for whatever reason something isn't configured properly, or if there's a setting that is interfering with their workflow processes, their business processes. If it's configured properly from the beginning, like Al said, that way you get the better adoption and things just generally go more smoothly. If they have a bad experience right out of the box, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So that's always a critical consideration too, is making sure that that configuration is done correctly and done by an expert. And then I also wanted to just touch on the security, because this is the main driving force. And I'm just curious, a show of hands, if anybody can, in the attendees box, raise your hand if security is a concern of yours if you are currently running Windows CE or Windows Mobile. Okay. So, and Al, if you could go ahead and you can go to the next slide, I'll just explain a little bit here. Don't take it from me. The Department of Homeland Security, they put out a study, a white paper, that you can go and read yourself, and it talks exactly about this. It's a study on mobile device security, and it defines all of the cybersecurity threats and how to mitigate those threats. The 3 recommendations that come away from this 150-page white paper, which I did read, all 150 pages, so if you like reading government documents, this is for you. Number 1, install the security patches. So we discussed earlier, do I need to install my security patches, or do I need to install my updates? Well, technically, yes, you do. You don't have to. I mean, you can be on an old version, but you're leaving yourself vulnerable. And here the DHS clearly, as their first suggestion, recommends this. They say that the most important defense against mobile device security threats is to ensure the devices are patched against the publicly known security vulnerabilities. I will, in the next slide, when we get there, I'll go through some of these and show you one in particular, WannaCry, how devastating that was to global business and how many companies were affected. And at one point, even the national health system in England went down. The second recommendation that came from this white paper from the Department of Homeland Security is the security commitment from vendors. So when making procurement decisions, enterprises should seek clear commitment from device vendors or mobile carriers that security updates will be provided in a timely manner. So this segues perfectly into when we were talking about a lot of these Windows options aren't even something you can order anymore for the handhelds, Windows Mobile, Windows CE. If you're thinking about buying these devices, the vendor should be advising you about the end of life. And if they're not being completely upfront with you. So you should at least be made aware that Android is taking up the majority of the market share. Windows will no longer have any of it as far as the mobile. And the vendors, you need to have a commitment from them that the security updates will be provided. And then finally, the third one was to decommission unsupported devices. And so when a device model is no longer supported with updates, enterprises should decommission those devices. It sounds familiar if you've attended the previous two webinars, but this is absolutely critical. And this is also something, Al, if you could just touch on, I know that we can assist in a certain way with this. What if you have like medical devices and things, if there's any regulations that they need to be properly destroyed?
Yeah, we have partners. When you look at primarily just having like a reverse logistics to acquire the assets, gather the assets, make sure we've got down to serial number detail, but then working with disposal companies that can give us confirmation of retirement and disposal of asset to protect that data. But yeah, we can provide that completely to the end through partner. Yes.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, just to summarize: install security patches, security commitment from vendors, and decommission unsupported devices. So definitely give that a read if you're in IT or if it's something that you're interested in. This will absolutely help protect your company. So does the end of Windows Mobile support mean the beginning of security vulnerabilities? The answer is yes. So in 2020 and 2021, when Microsoft ends extended support for Windows Mobile and Windows CE, you'll no longer receive any security patches or updates. And you read that right, no more security patches or updates. And then in the next slide, I'm going to, as I mentioned about the WannaCry example. So this was a ransomware that spread all across the world. And it did it within 4 days. Hundreds of companies were affected. And the way that it worked was, since this was a cryptoware, it was a ransomware, it would infect a computer, Windows computers, or Windows operating systems. And after you've been breached, it locks down everything. So all your files are encrypted. And the only way that you could unencrypt them is by paying somebody Bitcoin to give you the key to decrypt it. So I don't think that that's really a model that any business runs, where you pay ransoms in Bitcoin to hackers. But the best approach is don't get hacked in the first place. And we saw the 3 recommendations from the DHS of how to prevent that. And I just want to show in this video here, it's a short video that will show you exactly how quickly this happened. So it starts with one device gets infected on a network, that infects the other devices, and then if you're doing business with any partners or vendors or sending emails, and that file, it can just spread right down the line. And then before you know it, you have a major breach and a major crisis. You'll see that it pops up first in England on the first day. And then by day 4, it's already in 100 countries, and it's affected hundreds of thousands of users. So you don't want to be exploited, and it's absolutely critical that you do have these security updates and these patches, because this was back in 2017. So imagine what they have now. If you're running a device that received this patch, and we all did when it happened, Windows immediately put out a patch to protect against it. If you're not able to receive that patch from Windows, well, there's nothing to prevent you from getting breached again.
Thank you, Nick. All right, team, so that concludes our webinar for today. We want to thank you for joining us. As just a quick recap, in that looking for this next phase, again, prepare for this OS migration on your own time. Turn over every stone. Make sure you're prepared, and expect a very tightly managed and tightly supported environment around these mobile devices. As mentioned, you may not have as much touch points around these devices as Windows. We believe you're going to, so just again, vet that out and enjoy your migration strategy.
It's a good time to take inventory. It's a good time to start documenting your current applications that you have, and that way, with that information, you're armed and dangerous, and then you can begin putting together your migration strategy.